in shadows, a goblin scout. Moonclaw's tribe where I learned to slip out. Silent steps through the whispering trees. A rogue's life for me, moving with ease. Sneaking and peeking, I roam the streets with a lopsided grin and light on my feet. From the woods to the towns, I make my way. Grubnar here to save the day.
Hello and well met, folks. This is Vander Leveren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today we're going to be taking a look at our new kind of icon, Grubnar the Goblin. Essentially, this is going to be a series for both players and GMs. And the first episode, we're just going to introduce him and kind of give you the concept of what I had in mind for making this a reality for helping people to use Fantasy Grounds. So sometimes I think gamifying the game and the rules and that sort of thing is kind of fun. It could be corny or construed as wasteful, but I think that over time, though, it kind of helps with the identity of what you're trying to do sometimes. So I'm going to use Grubnar here as kind of gamification, and this way we'll use his character in different scenarios to illustrate different features in Fantasy Grounds. So that's basically what the series is going to be about. I decided to do this kind of last minute, and I've been planning the different episodes. I've also taken some feedback from the community, and it seems like most people want to see Fantasy Grounds features and maybe a mixture of everything else. If that resonates with you, let me know in the comments. But essentially, this little guy here is just going to be used to help illustrate some of the things that you can do in Fantasy Grounds. I don't know how many times I've done a tutorial that didn't have a really good example of an NPC or a player that could be used to show different things. So today we're going to talk about the NPC stat block, his history, and then we're also going to talk about the character version of him. So I have two versions of him. Basically, we're going to make the NPC version, and then we're going to compare it with the player version a little bit. But basically, this is going to be kind of like a guide to Fantasy Grounds in a sense. I wouldn't say it covers everything because obviously there's more rule sets and there's different things that occur in different rule sets. So this is going to focus on 5e. I am using the legacy 5e rules because as of now, the actual new rules don't support Goblin PCs yet. I don't know how that's going to work out in the future, so I'm still using legacy content. Hopefully what you might learn here is some navigation, some basic and intermediate features. So there's a little bit of everything for everyone. Creating customized characters with Goblin-inspired tips. So we'll use Grubnar here to illustrate some of those backstory role-playing and even show them in combat and that sort of thing. We'll touch maps, movement, and we'll use stealth for Grubnar since he's a thief. We'll talk about that a little bit. So this kind of gets into gameplay essentially a little. Combat tactics, traps, handling encounters like a true rogue, efficient inventory and item management. So we'll touch on that. I don't think that's going to be a big topic. Using effects, conditions, and also creating using powerful features to enhance gameplay. So there are some things that Fantasy Grounds offers that I believe it does a pretty good job with. And then obviously role-playing. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was some of the features that you get with your characters are generally kind of glazed over or browsed over. They don't really get used too much. And I'll give an example of that later. But he has this feature for city, basically like streetwise, and I don't think that gets utilized much. And it's kind of up to the GM and the player to play off each other for that to kind of work. But I think it's something that gets missed quite a bit in different classes. Like the Sage might have the library access, and I don't think that comes up enough in a session. Sometimes it doesn't come up at all. So each video is kind of going to be designed for somewhat beginner friendly, but also we'll have some tips and tricks and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the premise of this show, is to illustrate some of Fantasy Grounds' strengths, and won't really talk too much about limitations. I don't think that's productive, and it kind of wastes time. I do that in other videos where I talk about one thing and I talk about the downside, and I think I'm just going to mostly focus on the positive things, which is probably best anyways for the community. And then also, when you talk about developing this Grubnar character, who is going to be both an NPC and a player. So I already have a player version of him created. So if I pop this up, this is the character sheet. I went ahead and built this ahead of time. I'll go back, I think, in one of the episodes and recreate the character. But essentially, this is a level 5 rogue with an urchin background. He's a goblin, and then he's all set and ready to go for play. Like, all his skills are ready, all his abilities are listed here, and then we have the inventory sheet all organized. We have some of the notes, and I'll put in his backstory later, something a little shorter, because I have a huge history on him. I don't think you guys want to hear all that. And then, of course, all of his different items, his species or goblin stuff that's related to his makeup as far as like race goes, and then some standard actions, and then his rogue abilities. So he's got sneak attack, uncanny dodge, that sort of thing. So these are the sort of things you would notice on a character sheet, and when you're getting ready to play, you'd want this mode down here on combat. And then the GM will drag the player onto the combat tracker. So that's a GM function only, and players can't do that. Also, I have him up here on the top left. So if I added more, there would be more NPCs and players up on top. So what we're going to do is try to make a close or approximate NPC stat block, because I want to use Grubnar in different situations, not just as a player. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the data from his character sheet and from the notes that I took and put that into Fantasy Grounds. So I kind of have a little write-up for him here. And what I wanted to show you was, if you haven't used Fantasy Grounds in a while, or you're kind of new, it used to be a lot more difficult to copy and paste content from a source into Fantasy Grounds. So it wouldn't maintain a lot of the formatting that you would have in a book. So I'm going to bring up my Chat GPT session that I used to create his stat block. And this will kind of give you an idea of what exactly you can do with these. So just for the sake of creation here, this is a Chat GPT session, and this is his NPC stat block. So I formatted this in a format that will be compatible with the import tools for Fantasy Grounds for stat blocks. So this 5e rule set has a set of tools that you can import NPC stat blocks. Now, there are other rule sets that do something similar, but I'm just showing the 5e one because that's the one I'm most familiar with. So I'm going to take the actual content here and highlight this, and I'm going to copy this and paste it into Fantasy Grounds. But I wanted to show you that the formatting actually gets preserved in Fantasy Grounds now. So some of that supporting formatting. So I'm going to hit Control V as in Victor. And what you'll see here is you actually have almost identical copy and paste that came from the actual sheet there. So it actually respected, except for the bold letters, it respected all of the formatting initially. Before, you'd have weird page breaks. It didn't do these bullet points before, and I think tables are now supported more. I'll have to check that out. So let me check out tables. I believe that Smiteworks put in a change recently, so it kind of keeps most of the formatting from whatever your source is, which is a huge time saver if you're someone that does a conversion. So I'm going to actually go up. I have a table version. I wanted to see how it handles the table, because I know that tables are probably the most annoying copy and paste feature that doesn't get transferred over properly. So I want to take a look at how tables are handled. So here's a table-like thing. So let me grab this and see what this does. So not only are we using Grubnar to kind of show the game, but we're kind of exploring the features in Fantasy Grounds too. So that's what the name of this series essentially is. That's what we're trying to do. So let me look at that. Yeah, so it handled the formatting for the table, which is cool. So before, it would have made this all jumbled up and such. So that's cool. So I hit Control Z to get rid of that. Now what I want to do is bring up the NPCs and I've already made a category for my own custom content here. So I have NPCs that I'm going to be making for myself. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and hit all here, but I'm going to create my own group. So I'm going to click on add category. So now it's group 1 and hit edit. And then I'll just put custom NPCs, because this is basically where I'm going to stage those if I need to make any during the series. And now we're going to make Grubnar. So I'm going to click on this little import text for the hamburger menu on the bottom of the NPC data window. And this is the import tool that you'll be faced with. So the data that I had copied and pasted over here on the right hand side, I'm going to copy and paste that in here. So I'm going to take this data here all the way up to, I don't need the equipment, but all the way up to this throwing knife, and I'll hit Control Copy and Control V as in Victor, and that's that part of it. And then anything you want to add that's, not the stat block, that's maybe your notes or such, I'm going to go ahead and take this background, tactics, equipment, items, that sort of thing, and put it over here on the right hand side. So this will be for the GM that runs this particular character as an NPC instead of a player. So this is something that you might see or notice as you get into using a rule set like 5e and Fantasy Grounds. They don't really have very good NPC records that are closer to a character, and they weren't really meant to be, but there are lots of products out there for Fantasy Grounds. If you are looking for NPCs that are more like player characters, there's not a ton of them. I mean, they have some generic ones like the tracker and the scout and those sort of things, but they don't really have the same amount of detail as a player. You probably won't see that in most cases. So you'll either have to make your own or adjust an existing one by making a copy of it, cracking it open, and adding the features that you want. So I could have essentially took a basic goblin and changed up some of the stats on here. But I'm going to go ahead and import this. So this has the actions, all the abilities or features, and this ability should not say abilities. This should actually say features. If you don't have that there, it won't parse correctly. So you got to kind of be careful with that. So these are actions, up here is features, and I need to make sure that I have the correct import mode. Right now it's default as the 2024 D&D core rules. I want to make sure that I'm using the Monster of the Multiverse format. That way it actually parses correctly, because the text is a little different between the sources. So it has to do with the way these ability scores are formatted. Sometimes they're vertical, sometimes they're horizontal, and the way that the new 2024 rule set works is they're completely different arrangement in the stat block. So you want to make sure you have the correct import mode. So I'm kind of using like a legacy mode here, and go ahead and hit import. And if I did it right, it should pull that stuff in. So before I close this, I want to make sure that I have it right, because I might have to make an adjustment. And you can see at the bottom it says legacy here, so that's right. So here's the traits, which is what I should have put up here, not features. And then it's challenge level 3, which is kind of close to a level 5 character. Dark vision, passive perception. Yep, so that's similar. Proficiency bonus of 2. Now, he has a proficiency bonus of 3. Now, I don't know why that's different, but I imagine if I change this to challenge level 4, maybe that will increase it. Now, so what I will do is see if I can modify that. So if you hit the control key in some cases, or if you change the XP level, see, I think this is a little low. Let me go with 1200 and see if that changes anything. Yeah, it doesn't change anything. So this does impact the proficiency bonus depending on what you're trying to do. So I'm gonna actually set this to 900, because that's closer to what it should be. And then there's Goblin and Common as his languages, but I also want to add Thieves' Cant. So this is something that he has from being a thief. And then he's got all his saves and stats look right. So does that match this? Kind of, sort of. Why isn't it not the same? So 18 for this, 10. We need a 15 for con and 14 for intelligence. He is level 5 in this character version, but everything else looks right. So his chaotic good, leather armor, plus his dex bonus, got his hit points. And now let's take a look at the features in his actions tab here. So we have nimble escape, which is basically a note. We have sneak attack, which is 3d6. Let me see if that matches this. Yeah, so this isn't set for 5th level, so I need to go in there and change that to 3d6. And that comes from the rogue sneak attack table. And then we want to look at second story work. That's just a note, but at least it gives you an idea of what he's supposed to be able to do as a thief if you want him to be closer to the class. He has evasion, which comes with being 5th level. And let's see, nimble escape, fury of the small, so he does have that. So I don't know, 5 points of damage to the next target. So I don't think that parses, but what I can do is click the +5 before I roll to damage. So that would work with in that case, or you can use a modifier box. He has advantage on saving throws against being charmed, so that's like Fey Ancestry, and then it lists the thieves can't hear. I don't think that's necessary, so I can go in and actually remove that feature because I don't think that's necessary. There we go. So just cleaning up a little bit, even though ChatGPT did most of the work, I still have to go through it because it gets stuff wrong and it's not perfect. So you want to make sure you check your work. And then if you go to notes, this is basically how this came out, which I really like this format. I like the summary, and I really like how this is all nice and organized. And it just looks better, and it has more information. So if you're going to run this as a as a character or as an ally or something, you'd have a lot better time with that because you have more information. I think it's better to have more than less in this case because quite often when you're doing these things and you have these NPCs, there's really nothing back here. So here's the action. So that looks pretty good. And now for the pictures. So I already have made the tokens and the 3D art and all that stuff. So right now, if you don't have anything, it's going to assign it a letter token, which is the default behavior. But previous to the show, I actually made the tokens and the artwork. So that's basically this stuff here. So I'm going to add this into the NPC as well. So if I go to assets, here are the assets that I've created for this particular build for this character, or in this case NPC. So what we're going to do is take this. This is the 3D art part of it. This has already got the definitions for it for the 3D map. So I'm going to take and drag and drop that here. And then there is some artwork that I'm going to add here. So this is going to go here. Let me see if I want to replace it. Yeah, I think I'll use this one. And then for tokens, I need to go into my tokens folder and go to campaign and drag and drop that here. So this is all the artwork that I have set up for this particular NPC or this player. So that's basically the real basics there of creating a NPC. Is you can use the import feature, but you have to kind of know the formatting or kind of at least understand that the formatting has to be a certain way. And that all has to do with this particular format for depending on the rule set and depending on how the text is arranged. Quite often, though, it's the text that's wrong, and when you go to use this tool, the import tool, it can be very frustrating because it will not parse it correctly and everything will be all jumbled up. So you'll have to practice with that and get used to it. I've done lots of shows on just that. All right, so here's all the notes. We got all the artwork. It's all set. So now we have an NPC version and a player character version of Grubnar. So obviously he's considered evil here, and you can change the faction to friendly, and then you have two different variations of the character. So we have a PC version, and then we have the NPC version. And like I was saying before, it's not going to be one for one. They're not exactly the same thing, and it'll confuse you if you try to get perfectly the same as the character sheet. It's no way to do it without a bunch of work. Now there are extensions out there. I believe Mad Nomad, or not Mad Nomad, but Silent Ruin has something that for NPCs where you can add equipment and all kinds of cool stuff. So if you want that extra level of detail, you can pick up something like that. But I'm just using the vanilla Fantasy Grounds without any extensions. And this is kind of good to learn this first before you add all the other stuff. So this is just a way to make this gameplay a little smoother also when you go to use either or of these. So for instance, now if I was going to use the character here for Grubnar, I could basically apply whatever actions or kind of like your static actions that you only have to enable it once. So these would be passive abilities. So here's the uncanny dodge. Let me see what else we got here. Is evasion even on here? Yeah, so this guy doesn't have evasion, but this one does. So there's some differences between these two. And then they have the similar weapons. So there's a short blade. This is a +1 short sword. This one here is, I don't think it is. Let me double check the inventory. Yeah, so he doesn't have this guy doesn't have the magic items, so I might add those at this point. So he is 5th level. He does have a couple of magic items, pretty powerful ones, to be honest with you. So I'm going to go to items, and I'm going to take a look at short sword, because that was part of his backstory, was the magic items. Okay, so this is a short sword. This comes from the player's handbook, but if you want the magic variation of it, you can either make your own or you have to have the Dungeon Master's Guide enabled. So let me do that. So if I go to modules, see, I don't have that many things activated here. So if I go to activation, I'm going to go to the Dungeon Master's Guide. And this is the legacy one, not the new one. That's coming out in a couple days, I believe. And then go ahead and change that. Now, we should technically have the magic version of it. Let me get rid of that. Okay, so, so that's the regular short sword. And that's a short bow. I wonder why the magic one's not here. Let me see. Did I even... That's strange. Let me go. Books. Maybe I didn't enable it. Yeah, there's a Dungeon Master's Guide. Maps. That's why. I didn't enable the correct module. So activation. Load filter. So yeah, this is just the maps. Duh. So Dungeon Master. I'm going to take this filter off. Okay, there we go. So it helps if you have the right book loaded. Alright, so I just need the Legacy Dungeon Master's Guide. I don't need the maps of the player's part of it. So I'm just going to load that. Now, if I come over here to the items, it should be in there. So this is where the magic items come from. Here we go, +1 short sword. So I'll drag and drop that in here, and then I'll replace this older one with that. And then he has a ring of, I think it's Featherfall or something like that. So let me grab that. Ring of Featherfalling. And this does require attunement, so I'll click on the attunement button. And over here on this sheet, it's already mentioned in here in his equipment. So it doesn't really do anything like mechanical, mechanics wise, but it is mentioned here in his equipment. And he has like a bandolier of throwing knives, so you can throw throwing knives. He's got 3 of them, and then he's got his short bow, and he's got a short sword +1. So that's his base, and regular leather armor. So that's his loadout. And then here's the content. So this was updated. So now he has a short sword +1. There's a magic blade. It's got 20 arrows and short bow, 3 daggers, and I added unarmed strike in case you need to punch somebody or something like that. So that's another thing you could do. All right, so this is just kind of a preliminary showcase of Grubnar. And basically, we're going to be talking about some of the features for Fantasy Grounds depending on what content we're going to be displaying. Right now, we're talking about NPCs and the player character sheets, the difference between those two. It is quite a difference. Like I said, you can get it close, but it's never going to be quite one and the same, and without a lot of finagling. And there's ways that you can automate some of the stuff on an NPC sheet without redoing the entire sheet. So if you go to your, let's say, we're going to go to your effects up here. And what we have here are basically a list of effects that come with the rule set over here and conditions and such. And then over here is a module I have loaded, which is the conditions and effects modules from Rob2E. And this has a lot of the automation from the different class and race features that come with the Legacy 5e. So these are just kind of, some of these are generic, some of them are specific, like you have Blade Song here, you have Bless. So anything that you might need in regards to a feature, you can make your own over here on the right and then drag and drop that onto the combat tracker. So this would be part of a universal thing. So if you don't have, for instance, if you don't have a character that has the, that basically has the automation that you want, you can create it all in here and then just drag and drop it onto the NPC as needed, or the player. So he has a feature here called Fury of the Small, and he gets an extra 5 points of damage to the target. So there's a couple different ways I can handle that. So when he does an attack roll, if I click on +5 before, and then I execute the attack roll, it will add that +5 bonus automatically, or I can create an effect that'll expire after each roll. So down here in this area here, I can actually go in and edit, and I have one called damage edit. So if I come over here, it's DMG : and then I can put +5 there. And what will happen is if I need to use that, well, I need to put the rounds in there too, because I only want it to last 1 round. So if I put 1 in there, that will expire after he uses it. So let's go ahead and drag and drop that onto his NPC sheet. And now this will last 1 round. So when he uses that ability, the Fury of the Small, after he does the extra 5 points of damage, essentially will, I think he only gets it once per rest. So when it's his turn on the combat tracker, and let's say we did the attack roll, we did the damage, now when we actually pass the turn, that actually expired. So it doesn't happen again and again and again unless you redrag it. So you can do stuff like that for temporary automation for NPCs that don't have everything fleshed out. You're not necessarily going to have to do that. You could possibly do that on the stat block. So let me take a look at that. I don't know if there's a good way to do it, because you have to kind of specify if it's, whatever the intent is, it needs to have the type of damage, and you might be using blunt, or you might be using one of the other types of damage forms and not just piercing. So that's why it's kind of harder to do it here. So you could put 5 points of whatever damage, like piercing damage, because that's probably going to be the most common, but you never know. You could be using the short sword. So is that piercing? Not necessarily. Maybe it's slashing. This one is piercing, but you could have a blade that does slashing instead. So that's kind of the challenge there with that, is it's harder to differentiate it unless you make all 3 of the attack forms, and that's kind of a pain in the butt. That takes up a lot of room on your NPC stat block. So like for the character version of this, we have this Fury of the Small, so I can just click on this, and this says damage 3. And then when I use the character sheet, when I actually do the attack roll, it will add the extra 3 for this character if I use the correct sheet or the correct attack roll. It says this is 1d6 plus 5, so it probably added that already. And then when you use it, you click on this little button here, and that disappears until the GM does a long rest. So if I go to menu and go to rest and go to long rest, that feature will come back on the character sheet. So a little different on how it's handled between an NPC and a player. So being that the GM usually controls the NPCs, they can decide when to toggle on or off these sort of features. On a player character sheet, it's best if you can get it to be used up, but they still have to manually check that off. So there are some things that you don't have a lot of control over, and you just hope that your players pick that up and learn how to use their character in a given situation. So again, we have Grubnar as the player character, and then we have it as an NPC. So I want to take a look at how the 3D tokens take a look at how those look, because I haven't seen the uses, and I haven't seen exactly what they look like. So I'm going to go into the maps and images and go into images, and this is a bundle. This amazing maps bundle is something that I picked up on the Fantasy Grounds store, and I believe I had one of these set up somewhat. Yeah, so here's the mountain thicket. So this is the map that I got off I believe this is from the Fantasy Grounds store. And then I'm going to take and just going to stretch this out. Maybe I'll actually put it in the background so you can actually see what's going on. So that and that. Okay, so this map is now the entire background. So we want to take these individuals here, and we'll just drag and drop those onto the map. I'm just going to temporarily close these for now so we can see what's going on. So this one is the PC, and then this one is the NPC. So they both have dark vision, and this is the map. So what I want to do here is take a look at the 3D aspect of this. So first of all, I'm going to turn on this navigation arrow so I can zoom in and out if I have to. And then I'm going to take and change this to the camera mode. Yeah, so it looks pretty good, not too shabby. So this is the kind of the 3D view. Yeah, so that turned out pretty good. So it's kind of weird, but what happens is when you change the camera view, it looks like the tokens are kind of fisheyed or like leaning over, but it's actually the fact is that they're trying to are trying to face you no matter which way you go. So you have the center point where it kind of pivots and rotates, and sometimes it looks off compared to the way the map is drawn and such. It looks kind of weird. But that looks pretty good. So if you were going to fly, like let's say you had a potion of flight or a spell, you can hold down the Alt key and move him up and down. Or if you were going to burrow, you can kind of do the same thing. But I think that's kind of a nice feature, which is kind of new for Fantasy Grounds. You weren't able to do that before. So for instance, if you came up here on this bluff, maybe you're now, instead of saying that you're at ground zero, whatever, you can actually you can set this to where, even though he looks higher, you could say he's up like 10 feet or something like that. This way you can calculate for this, even though he looks like he's above it. So that's something that's kind of cool. There's really not a good way to do elevation in Fantasy Grounds, not without a big rewrite of the entire engine here. So it looks pretty good. So they both have their own kind of charm to them. And Grubnar is kind of he's a thief. He started off on the bottom, kind of worked his way up. And in his retirement days, apparently he's going to have an inn. So he's kind of kind of not exactly your run-of-the-mill goblin. I mean, kind of is, but he has a backstory too. So not just your generic goblin. All right, so if you're going to, let's say you wanted to have an area of effect for Fantasy Grounds. So in the vanilla version without a bunch of extensions and tokens, if you right click on the map and go to pointers, let's just say you had an area of effect, you left click and draw out a radius, and then you can take the center of it and drag and drop and move it. So if you have to, you can, you can grab the center and move this. And then let's switch it over to back to the regular mode here. And this is how you move this thing around. So this is helpful like when you're trying to target an area, or maybe you want to point at something like this rock. So you can take both the mouse buttons, the left and right, hold them down and maybe point. This is the direction I want to go. Or if you're if you know how to use Fantasy Grounds and you kind of get the new functionality, if you actually you can use, like if you wanted to ping something, you can go to ping mode. And you can double click. Oh, is that the right one? Nope, that's target mode. I want ping mode. There we go. So you can click on a location on the map and ping a map if you need to. There was a shortcut with double click on the you can double click or double tap on the space bar, but I think they're changing now. I don't remember. But you get out of ping mode. So anyhow, that's just some of the things that I wanted to test to see if they're working. And the other thing was I was checking out the line of sight, and also if you wanted to check out their dark vision, you want to make this scene dark. So if I unlock this and go into enable player view, which is going to give me an idea of what it looks like from the player side, and move this around, you kind of get an idea of what the player is looking at or how they're seeing this. And then you can go into the lighting and go to the ambient light. Right now it's set to sunlight, but if you wanted to, you can go to, moonlight. And now you have this dark kind of darkness in the background. It's like time of day essentially. Yeah, so anything beyond it doesn't have light, it's kind of more of a black and white color for dark vision. So that's kind of cool. So basically, this is the start of the series. I think the next show we'll probably end up building the character again. This way you can kind of see that process. And I'm going to be using the legacy content because most of us still haven't quite moved on to the new 2024 rule set. I'm doing a separate series on that. And as a matter of fact, the Goblin build species or whatever is not supported yet. So you have to use legacy content anyway. So I might as well just use that. But this is basically the differences, some of the differences between the NPC stat block and the player version. So they are quite different, and they won't ever be exactly the same, but you can get close. And obviously I see this challenge rating of 3, proficiency 2, but then this is a level 5, proficiency 3, so all these little nuances. You can change that. You could probably up this and get this to scale. I believe it goes off their experience points. Let me see if I can change that. Yeah, I don't know what changes this proficiency bonus, but I know if you hold like for these things on the newer sheet, you can change that. You can hold down the Alt key, but this is the legacy sheet, so I'll just go back to 900. I think it should be higher. It was set at 700 because it's basing it off a Goblin, so I might have to recalculate the XP, but basically it's a challenge rating 3 Goblin Thief. So that's just basically how I'm testing this stuff out. And I think the next episode, we're going to build Grubnar, the actual player character. I'll just use this as a model and maybe build it up to level 3. And then after that, we'll start getting into gameplay, like, combat and using the combat tracker and all that good stuff. So hopefully some of this information is useful. Some of you probably already know half of this stuff, but I just kind of want to go over some of these things, and as new features come out in Fantasy Grounds, we'll also show that. And my biggest happy moment right now is the fact that when you copy and paste text, it keeps more of that formatting instead of less. Because before, when you copy and paste from like a PDF, it would just be a mess. You'd have to massage the data and fix it. But now it actually will copy and paste most of the formatting over, and it will pay respects to the text layout and formatting better than it did before. So I'm really happy about that. I think it was mentioned kind of not really outwardly, but if you follow on the Fantasy Grounds forums, you actually go to the website, and then you can go to the laboratory. So if you go to the forums and you go to the laboratory, you can see kind of what they're testing and what they're changing. So here's a feedback thread. So if you're going to be using the test version, you can come in here and make make whatever claims you got against the new release. And then for beta release, these are all the things that are being fixed or updated or added. So this is the stuff for 4.6. And then if you want to know what's happening with the actual rule set, when you go to the City Hall, all these release updates, or most of them, are either small fixes or some sort of, they call it a hot fix. And these are like QA related stuff, like misspelled words, missing token, or whatever. But if you want the rule set updates, you'll have to click on like for instance, this is the Fantasy Grounds rule set updates. This started in September, but this is for the support for 2024 rule set. So if you click on that, this is going to give you an idea of what's being worked on or what's already been added. So this is what you want to follow if you want to know what they're working on or what was recently added. And you can subscribe to that thread on the forum. So if this is a thread that you want to subscribe to, you can like this thread and then subscribe to it in the thread tools too. So subscribe to this thread, and any changes that happen, you can decide, like, do you want it to email you or only through the control panel, or however you want to do it. This way you can kind of keep abreast of what's being changed. And so that's helpful sometimes, especially if you're a developer or you make content. You kind of want to know some of this stuff. But there is a lot of changes happening. And then there's more things like if you were, unfortunately, this stuff's kind of scattered around, which is one thing I just drives me bananas about Fantasy Grounds, is all this information is just like everywhere. So the other place to follow stuff for the 5th edition rule set is the actual thread. So if you click on the thread here, and then you go to this, here's for the legacy bug reports, here's for character wizards, and these are different things that have surfaced, and it just depends on what build you're looking at and what version of the rule set. But these are like, there's a legacy bug report, and these are things that are more to do with the the modules and the player character creation. And then there's just general questions in here about these players handbook. Let's see what this one is. Yeah, someone was asking if the 2024 has been implemented, and it has been, and it's been improved. Like, there was a lot of problems initially, but Moon Wizard and Super Teddy knocked a lot of those out. So we don't have to worry too much. I mean, there's some things that are weird, but there's been changes too. All right, so those are the places you want to look for updates, changes, and things that are going to impact your games. I would do that actually before you update, if you can think about it. Unfortunately, it's hard to get your players to get into the same routine of not updating, because if they purchase anything like new dice, or maybe they are also GMs, they're going to want to update Fantasy Grounds. There's no way to differentiate that. It's difficult to say, hey, don't update your Fantasy Grounds, especially if you're going to buy stuff, right? That prevents you from buying things You might be able to buy it, but you won't be able to update and pull that information in. I think Smiteworks is going to eventually change that to where you can decide which stuff to update and such, and which would be helpful because this on or off business with updating can be detrimental on both sides of this. Like maybe you don't want to spend an hour and have it update Pathfinder if you're not using Pathfinder content. Or if you purchase something like a new dice set, does that mean you can't use it because you're afraid to update because you don't want to break your game before the game, so there's kind of a lot of gray areas there and a lot of things that you'd have to take in consideration when you're running a campaign. I do ask my players not to update if they can help it. Generally, between versions, like small little incremental things, that doesn't normally break the problem. The problem is if Fantasy Grounds functionality, like the main features, get updated, and then or a completely new version, like going from 4.5 to 4.6, that can be problematic between two versions. So anyways, I wanted to say thanks for joining, and we'll keep this series going if I see enough interest in it. Generally speaking, I'll start something, and if it seems like people aren't interested, or maybe the information is not what people want, I'll end up discontinuing it and moving on. So we'll see how this goes. Leave me feedback whether you hate it or not, and I'll work on that. And I don't want to go in too much further because these get too long.